My name is George Troll Sternberg, as known, and I actually entered the military in my junior year. I signed papers with a SF recruiter, and I had to finish school first, and then I would start my career. And I spent a little over 10 years in the military, all with special forces and all in the, what you children now like to call black ops. And it was a tremendous amount of years. I would have loved to stay, but I had to take care of family matters. And I enjoyed the camaraderie and the abilities of people I served with. When I first entered the military, I weighed 112 pounds. Every place I went, everything I got assigned to, they told me I wasn't going to make it. And I've been through this my whole life. And I proved everybody wrong. Excuse me. But once you set your mind to do something, you do it. I was raised in a home with a 21-year-old vet, which was my dad. And I know what he went through because he spent 21 years in, and he was in the Second World War and the Korean War. And he did he was a demo expert and must have been pretty good because all different, I learned this after he passed away, that he had been shifted around to different places to do different missions. So I was aware of what was going on. But he didn't talk about it a lot like we didn't. But when I went in the military, we discussed all this stuff. You know, what do you want to do? Where do you want to be? What unit do you want to go into? And I told him, I said, I've heard of 2 units. One of them's just starting up, and one has been in existence since the 50s. And I want to do stuff that people haven't done. And he told me, he said, well, you're an excellent swimmer. He said, you're not afraid of the water, you respect it. And you're not dumb. He said, you've been through all of this stuff your whole life now. You're 18 years old, and you've made a decision not to go on to school, to go on in the military. And I said, yeah. And he told me, he said, you'll do very well if you keep your head about you. He said, when people get nasty with you, you can't just retaliate like you've always done in the past. He said, you got to keep that under control. And I took him for his word. He said, the choices you made, a new program starting with the Navy, and it's going to be called the SEAL program. Well, when I signed up for the military, I was a junior in high school. And I was lucky that I got associated with a SF recruiter. He didn't like my size, but I told him that was none of his business. Just steer me in that direction. And he did. He was honest. And I told him, I said I wanted special forces because my dad and I had sat down and talked about it. He said they're overall a better quality unit. Okay, they deal with the people from that country that you're going to be going into. And he said the SEAL program is what a branch off of what the old UDT teams used to do. He said you'd have been excellent at that too. But he said it's better for overall training if you stick with this. And I said, that's wise words. I said, that's the way I think I'll go. But I had to finish school. And you have to graduate, period, or they won't follow through on that agreement. So when I did go in, I was strictly no bars, no holding hands or anything else. This is what I'm setting my head to do. And I ended up, I went through basic, was told I was too small to follow through. I was told when I got to AIT, which John and I were in the same type of communications, radio teletype we started at, and that's why I met my buddy Michael Tucker, that we ended up going all through SF and jump school and everything else together and running on the same recon team. Well, we come out like 4th or 5th in our class, both of us. So the military said, you guys are good enough, we're gonna send you to 12 more weeks, only getting the top secret clearance, and it's a kind of a crypto messaging system, breaking codes, you know, the whole ball of wax. We got it all right there. Then we went to jump school. Then when I got off the bus at jump school, they told me, last one off the bus, take my duffel bag and throw it on the ground and jump from the top step down. Standing outside the bus, there's this guy about 6'4", black guy. He's the DI, he's a sergeant first class. He said, son, pick your bag back up and get on the bus. I said, what are you talking about, Sarge? He said, you're too small, you can't open up the parachute. I looked at him eye to eye and I said, I respect your rank. I respect you as an individual because you arrived at that rank, but I'm going to say something frank and I want you to listen to it. My dad was my size and he taught down here in his military career at jump school. So don't feed me your bullshit. I'm going to make it through it and I'll be wearing the wings. No problem. I went through with a couple, what they call Mr. Footballs from different states, and I burnt their butt. Good. Made me feel good. Then they send us from there. Mike and I go on, we go through SF training together, both in communications. I was told in there, you're not going to make it. You're too small. Mike looked at them guys and he said, you're crazy. Mike didn't get any of this stuff because he's 6'2", 215. We made it through SF training. We get assigned to the 6th group. And that's when SF was going through. They were trying to downsize it because we were the black sheep at that time in the military. And the brass was always trying to get rid of special forces. Well, I get assigned to that team in the 6th group. Mike and I both, junior radio operators, never heard of two junior radio operators on the same team. We get told They got our records. We come through flying colors. We were good operators. We knew what we were doing. Okay. With them for 3 months. First 2 weeks training with the team. Next 6 weeks, winter survival north of Fairbanks, Alaska. In the winter, in January. Went up there, made it through, come back. 2 weeks in the camp, or at group. They call, Mike and I get transferred to the third group. Both report, assigned to the same team, A team. Unheard of. Okay. There's a junior radio operator, there's a senior radio operator on an A team. Well, I'm sitting down for a second time in the team meeting. Dumbass, excuse me. But, Sergeant, can I ask a question? Team sergeant said, yeah, go ahead, Sergeant Sternberg, what's up? I said, there's 2 junior radio operators on the same team. He said, yeah, I know, both of you's got excellent writing and everything that's been passed on to me so far. I said, well, maybe I shouldn't answer the question then. He said, no, I understand that there's supposed to be an E7 here, senior radio operator, and a junior radio operator. He said, well, since you asked the question, you get to fill the paperwork out the first week, and then Mike will get it the second week. Okay, we got that established. But while I was with the third group, we did a couple type of top secret stuff that we did with the thing that still hasn't been divulged yet. So we're not going to say anything about that. But Mike and I were with them for about 2.5 years. And after we come back, been with them, I'd been through, they sent him to Fort Rucker for aviation to get his fixed wing and rotary wing. And he learned how to fly a helicopter. And then they sent me to Cocoa Beach for the Navy dive school at the time. They've moved it since then. But I went through their dive program, and then the last week, all we were supposed to do was get familiarized with what they call the hard helmet, a hard suit. It's the deep sea diving. And woke up one morning and nobody's there. They pulled all East Coast available divers out because one of our nukes had sunk in the North Atlantic. And I'm not sure what the date was. I can't remember that stuff. I tried to, but it just not coming to me. And so we're actually qualified divers, but we didn't get recognized as it with a certificate. It's in our records, but that's the way that goes. So I ended up with Mike. He was in one place, I was in another. We come back, we're on the same team. Then both of us get Halo qualified because our team sergeant had been with and was one of the captains for the Golden Knights. At the time, that's when SF had a lot of us in the Golden Knights. Well, he sends me to school, or sent both of us to school actually. We come back from that, we're with the team maybe a month. You guys are signed to the 5th group. We get to the 5th group, we're all standing out there waiting for the sergeant major, all the replacements on a normal day. Probably 50, maybe Tilt can say something on how many were there when he come in country. But we were standing there and we're wondering, are we going to go to an A team? Are we going to be signed here or what? Because of what we'd been doing in the past and what our qualifications in that were. So we get assigned in the 5th. We're standing there. Out of that group of 50 men, about 50, they didn't call 4 names, which meant that they were going to fly out. You're going to A105, you're going to B team, or you're going to stay here. And all different MOSs, which is what you were trained to do in SF, whether you're radio, engineer, medic, whatever. Well, they didn't call Mike and I's name again. So he said, Sergeant Major said, after I get everybody assigned, he said, you guys can go in, walk into my office, grab a cup of coffee, donut, and then walk to the back conference room. And you 4 guys go in there and sit around the tables. In front of each chair is 2 pieces of paper. I want you to read them both sides. If you agree to it, sign them. Okay. There's a sergeant first class from the 7th group, I think it was. There was 2 of us, Mike and I from the 3rd group, and 1 guy from the 1st group. Well, Mike looked at me and he said, oh shit, what are we getting ourselves into now if we sign it? He said, we've already been through some of this crazy stuff before. So I looked at him, I said, I went like this, and I said, well, let's see what it brings. So I signed it, he signed it. One of the guys, I think from the 7th group, didn't sign it. Well, the sergeant major, when he come in and talked to us, he said, I don't care if any of you signed it. Not on your records. You won't be looked down on by anybody because it stays right here. No problem. 3 of us out of the 4 signed it. He said, tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, I want you out here, and I'll have you where you're going. Well, 1 guy went down south. I think he went to Bambi to it. Mike and I were supposed to be on a chopper. We're going up north. Either Da Nang, which was CCN headquarters, Phu or Khe Sanh. So you get on a chopper, fly off. There was a guy that was flying with us, another American, had us where we were going. And he said, Mike, you're off here at Phu. He said, George, you're standing on the chopper, you're going to Khe Sanh. I said, oh, that's nice. We get up to Khe Sanh. I'm up there and I end up running into a name that was mentioned earlier that I end up getting assigned to an all-Brew Montagnard team. And there was 2 other Americans on it. And up there, some teams had names, some didn't, because of all the guys that were ended up wounded and that stuff from all of the shelling and cross-border operations. And he finally just said, when I got up there, my 1-0 or team leader was John McGovern, which Tilt mentioned in his interview. And excellent teacher. I consider him a friend, a very good friend. He's passed away now since then. And Joe Conlon, which has also passed away. And I learned from 2 guys that were excellent soldiers.
And then you worked with the Montagnards, correct?
The Montagnards up there were they were like our American Indians. They were the people and the race that was there first. They were up in the mountains. They hunted, they fished, you name it. They farmed, anything to provide for that village they were out of, or the tribe in general. But these people were very good, or good trackers, good identifying everything that you looked around for. So I learned from them also, okay? And when they said something, theirs was broken English, you know. The French tried to teach them English and French, and, you know, they just had an intermingle of several languages. Well, I was up there all through the Tet Offensive of '68. I picked up 2 Purple Hearts up there. But it was kind of it was a lot closer. I mean, John could tell you that in his own words, but the camaraderie within this unit, you learn on a one-on-one basis, and then it grows to everybody else that was associated in this outfit. And I think I've been on baseball teams, hockey teams, football teams, fire departments, and it just happens that being with these guys there's no comparison. Well, like I said, the 1-0 was John McGovern, and as an experienced SF, been with them a long time, and Joe Conlon, which was also had been with them a few years. He was a staff sergeant at the time. I learned quite a bit, okay, as a soldier, okay, and how things were operated in country, what we had to do, what we were supposed to do. The Montagnards, we had 10, okay, and most of the recon teams, when they functioned as a recon team, would run with 5 or 6 and 2 Americans. But being at Quezon is a little bit different story, because I got there in August. By the time we trained and everything, we'd been taking in rounds. Occasionally, we may get 20 rounds or 30 rounds. They were trying to get the artillery at the Marine base, but they'd always miss and drop them 50 or 60 in our camp. Well, we couldn't function in the recon status type, so we would do our regular training locally outside our wire, and every once in a while one of our teams would get, we'd have to go out, and there was a distinctive mountain called Core Rock, and you'll hear that mentioned, and that was to the northwest of us. And so we would be sent on overnight or an all-day deal, and most of the time we had to walk in. And once it started getting really bad, we would be sent to see if we could locate any large movements in our area. And you'd encounter different confrontations here and there. And our yards were professionals. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They'd been in battle since the French were there, and probably before that. But they were the locals in the area. as for the team we had, they were all excellent. You know, I mean, no matter what their age was, that they were still alive. That's what amazed me for the years.
And how young were some of these Montagnards?
You couldn't tell by looking at them. You know, you might think that one was 12 when he might have been 22. You know, you could tell the older ones, but when you got into the young ones, you never knew actually what their age was. But I would have to give my total respect to all of them, all of the yards in the camp, but especially to the team we had at that time. Up there, sure, they saved my ass just like every place else I was at.
Now, as a radio operator, did you feel like you had a target on your back specifically because you were the radio operator?
Well, I've never looked at it from an enemy point of view, but I can show you all the equipment that was damaged that I carried on my back.
Really?
I mean, it was useless after I come back. I mean, bullet holes in it. And why they didn't go all the way through and go through me is beyond me, you know. Then we may get into one of them stories. But
let's do it.
It just happens that, and most of the time I had two radios. One PRC 25 and the mic, handheld mic. And then I had what they called an ERC 10, which was an ultra high frequency that I actually could talk to the aviators that were flying them, whatever aircraft it was. But yeah, I felt like a magnet. You know, I mean, I've got several Purple Hearts. Some of them we never even, our medics took care of us on the way back, or once we got back to camp, or a quick trip to the local MASH unit. But that kind of stuff was never fully reported because don't want a paper trail. If you go to any other conventional unit to be treated, there's a line of paperwork that has to be filled out. And since we were in this type of operation, that wasn't something that the government wanted to be publicized. So everything had to be hush-hush, and anybody else that was in SOG would tell you that that's why a lot of the guys weren't awarded the decorations that they actually deserve. Okay? Which it doesn't mean hooey to anybody anymore, because there's a lot of men. Lynn Black, for one. Pat Watkins, another one. Those guys should have received the Medal of Honor. No doubt in my mind. Should have been done on the spot. But they didn't get it. The highest thing they got were either a Silver Star or a Bronze Star, you know. And you can have all of them you want, but it really doesn't matter now because of the camaraderie within the guys. They know you done it. They know what you done. Tilt, for one, he has a different version of the story, but when they flew into camp, and he said it in his interview earlier, when they flew into camp and walked in through the gates, it was RT Oregon running out to get on that chopper to go in after Idaho that they hadn't heard from, and they didn't make their radio checks. What he did hear on his first few hours coming in were two loudspeakers that were outside the sergeant major's office in the radio room that carried all of any firefight or trouble with the team or whatever, because they had to get another team ready to go in after them, which is called the bright light. And Mike and I, once we did get back together, we were one that ran a lot of them. And when John got into camp, he can verify any of that stuff.
So tell us a little bit about what bright lights are.
Bright lights are when a recon team hasn't reported at a scheduled communication. Sometimes we had one at night, one in the daytime. You didn't make them. The suspect was you were in trouble or you had already died, not able to make contact. And how we function as a bright light team, we had our regular missions, but the way we operated as a team, and at that time we were at Fubai, and I had an all Chinese Nung team, and they were soldiers from China that Mao Zedong had sent down to fight with the French, because he didn't like Vietnam, because Vietnam together never lost a conflict, whether people know it or not. But they were seasoned soldiers. And their second generation that were born in there and were born in Vietnam and South Vietnam were also seasoned because they'd been involved in it for such a long period of time. But being that we had such a functionable team in the bright lights, these guys were not afraid of anything. I mean, they knew what their job was, they knew what they had to do, and we done it, period. John probably mentioned several times that the fear was always there in you, but you continued to do what your mission was. And in a bright light situation, your main concern was to try to find this other team. Whether they'd been killed, captured, or they were just plain missing. Maybe they were out there trying to evade them. Okay, and they got into a situation where quite a few of them were killed and there was only maybe one or two left alive, and they were apart from each other. Our job was to go in and verify this stuff and try to find them. A lot of our bright light teams, the minute they'd hit the ground, I mean, it was nothing but chaos. They'd walk right into the middle of it seemed like a trap, but there was always so many of them. And a bright light team normally had the full composition of their team, which was be 10 indig, 2 Americans, maybe a medic, or a medic that had run on that team's operations before and knew how they functioned, because each team operated different. You know, the purpose was the same, but how they functioned as a team was different. Okay, they were trained different. They were trained by different people, and but we had functioned so well together that everybody felt comfortable with each other. Now, Mike and I, being together ever since AIT, could understand that just by looking at him or watching him breathe. You know, does he have doubts about this mission? Or he'd look at me and say, "What's on your mind, George, about this?" And I said, "Well, I don't think this is going to work. Let's see what we can converse with the rest of the team and what we can come up with." But this stuff all had to be boom, 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 right off the top of your head right now when you had these questions, because you couldn't sit there and debate it like you would back at camp when you were training. It had to be, the decision had to be made now. What a lot of the bright light teams would run into is once we got on the ground and we're in the same area, we had the same thing to worry about, large amounts of NVA. They weren't VC like in the early days. They were actually North Vietnamese Army. And it's kind of a harder path to follow, you know, because the minute your aircraft enters that airspace over your landing zones, you're receiving fire, because they know that you're not going to leave another team in there by themselves, whether they're dead or alive. They know there's another team's going to come in. So that area is already set up and beefed large to eliminate you. Because, well, Tilda will tell you, our casualty rate was unbelievable. Over 100 and some percent, you were going to be wounded once. Same thing for wounded twice. 3 times, maybe down around 99%, if you stayed alive from the first couple wounds. And that kind of figures you had to push off and keep out of your head.
Maybe.
Well, I've had several while I was in country. I had excellent people around me. The same people that Tilt had. Spider Parks, Pat Watkins, Joe Conlon, John McGovern, all guys that ran, you know, that had pieces of information that I've tried to retain over my life after I left the military. And while I was in. This would be wise for you to take as some advice. Might not be a criticism, it might be just saying you'd be better if you had this type of thought when you look at different things. And I took it to heart because they'd been through it, okay? And they weren't forceful like a lot of people in the military that say, well, you either do it this way or, you know, that we're not going to do it your way. Well, that's not the way they were. They sat and listened to you, and then when they spoke from experience. They didn't speak from, oh, just because I'm a staff sergeant or a master sergeant, I'm going to tell you to do it this way. And you get a lot of that in different branches. Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, you know. It's however their higher NCOs or officers think. And but that's not the way that they tried to teach you in Special Forces. Well, when I came home, we flew into Japan and utter chaos. We couldn't get off the plane when they refueled it. There was demonstrations all along the outside of the airport when we flew in, so they just flew in, refueled, and then brought us back to the States. Well, I flew in the same location that Tilt did when I came home. But Mike and I had extended a couple, 3 times, and when we got home in Fort Lewis, I was kind of lucky because when we flew in, the NCO that was in charge of giving us our orders. We knew we had to go back to Fort Bragg, but he gave us orders when we were to be transported and fly out to go back to Fort Bragg. He was the same black sergeant that told me I was too small to become airborne. And when I jumped off the aircraft with my master jump wings and halo and all that stuff, he looked at me and he said, "I remember you." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You were the drill sergeant in jump school that told me I was too small to jump." I looked at him and I said, "How many jumps you got?" 75. I said, "I had 250 static line and almost 700 halo." He kind of looked at me and I said, "You see this?" I said, "That's green." And yes, I just spent about 30 some months over here coming back, and I'm alive. And he just looked at me and he just shook his head. He said, "I don't believe it." He said a few frank words, but he said, "I don't believe it." When I started my family, I had to get out. My dad passed away, and he was a tool and die maker after he retired from military at General Motors in Toledo. And I knew that my mom wasn't ever going to make enough money, and I had 5 brothers and sisters. So between the sergeant major of the 5th group at the time, stateside, and the company commander, we decided the best thing to do is go home, try to take care of it. He said, "You can go to work as a carpenter." And I said, "Sure, I'll go home, start my apprenticeship with the carpenter trade and try to get it settled." And then he said, "We're going to give you 2 years. If you come back within that 2 years, you got to be in shape, and you have to stay in contact with the sergeant major in charge and call me every week. And I'll tell you what's going on and how things are going here, and you let me know how things are going at home." After 2 years was up, I had already met somebody, kind of calmed down a little bit, and I said, "I doubt very much if it'd be worth anybody's while for me to come back in right now." I turned around and I joined the fire department, got married. All this time, still not able to tell anybody, a vet that went through Vietnam, nothing. No older guys, none of my scoutmasters or that were old vets. I couldn't tell them anything. And I couldn't tell my wife. And when my kids started coming along, I couldn't tell them. And my wife kept asking me. She said, "I know you were a Green Beret. That you can't hide. But what did you do?" I said, "I can't tell you, Vicki." I said, "That's it. I can't say a word to you." Well, it started eating on her mind, and we were married for 14 years, and finally she just said, "You do things at night that just aren't normal." And I said, "I've never hurt you. I don't plan on ever hurting you." But she said, I don't know what to expect. I said, "Well," I said, "you have to do what you have to do." I said, "My attitude toward you isn't going to change, okay? You've raised 3 sons." I said, "They're all excellent men now." And I said, "But you do what you have to do." when Tilt's book came out and Jason Hardy's book came out, had my picture on the cover. I took both of them, put them in my car, and when I drove back up to Ohio, well, this has been about 4 years ago, I was over at my youngest son, and he was working on his house, and he asked me to come up and take a look at some of the wiring he'd done. So I went up there and looked at it, and he said, well, Mom's coming over to help his future wife go over the interior and start decorating in that. So I said, good, I'm glad she's gonna come over. So when she came over, I said, here, these are yours. I said, read them, then you'll understand. And she read them, and I was up there in the spring and summer at my son's, and come time for my birthday, which at that time we'd been divorced since 78, and it was already 2017 or 18 when that last book come out with me on the cover. And she said, I had no idea. Called me out of the blue, and it just happened to be on my birthday. And she told me happy birthday, which she'd never said that for 30, 40 years, that we were apart. And that really hit home. But it's like, he goes out, tries to get the veterans together to talk and get the stuff so it's history. And I did it in an opposite direction. I coached kids, pee-wee baseball, hockey, you name it, but I also served on a local volunteer fire department, which I was a licensed paramedic and also a captain on the fire department and arson investigator. So my backpack never came off. All through the carpenter trade, the whole thing, I had almost 30 some years in the fire department also. So, I don't feel bad what I've done. And I've had real close friends told me that I never served as a SF soldier. I've had several friends of mine that have told me that, there's no way. But my stuff's in the history books. You can't tell an individual by his color, race, religion, anything. You've got to open up the book to really understand the person. And most of the time, your ideas are going to change when you get to know the individual. And SF, what I've learned in there is just unbelievable. And the people are incredible. Any given time in a 24-hour period, you could be in the classroom or working with your teams or jumping or that, and you come back to the team house and within a couple hours you're on a plane going to Germany, Czechoslovakia, China, whatever your assignment happens to be. And if you're what nowadays they call black ops, if you're involved in that, nobody knows about it but you and the mission that you're going on. And you can't tell anybody. You can't tell your wife, can't tell your kids, can't tell your neighbors, nobody. So everything is within you and the team you're with, and that's it. I've seen it firsthand. if you take, no matter where they're from, I don't care if they're from the ghetto in Chicago, New York, you take a farmer kid from Kansas, you get somebody that's way out there from California, San Francisco, whatever, and you bring them all together in the military, and they become a unit after 6 or 7 months training, okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, they're sent off to a combat, all right? They get in the country, might be a couple days or so, and they're in an active unit, and the unit goes into a battle, whether they're in the platoon, company size, battalion size, whatever. They engage the enemy, and they're here in this platoon or company, there's 5 of you that know each other, and you're working together. And then all of a sudden, bang, either 2 get shot and they're dead, and there's 3 left. If those 3, as individuals, don't have somebody they can talk to, a belief in a superhuman or somebody that's more superior than they are, or they can talk to a priest, a rabbi, whatever, and they haven't been brought up through a religious surrounding or come from a broken family, these kids don't know what to do. So they either turn to alcohol or drugs, or they become a bully factor, okay, or join a gang or whatever, where they're accepted. And that's why you're seeing the high rate of suicides now, because now these people are old enough and they're trying to raise families and grandkids and trying to get that across to them, and it's not getting across because they haven't been in an adult situation where they had somebody to help them. And a lot of the people that came out of Vietnam, you can see it. Drug problem, alcohol, and even some of the older ones like Tilt and I. They're still drinking heavy, trying to squelch these things that they remember. And that's a lot of what I learned from the older guys that were around me in SF and my dad, that you've got to be stronger than that. You've got to, if you've got a problem, and I can't give you an answer, or the priest can't give you an answer, or the rabbi can't give you an answer, then we'll find somebody that can give you an answer. And a lot of the younger SF, that's what they're getting now. That kind of thing is coming out within the groups. And I hope it generates down to the younger generation, because what happening to us in a few years, it's going to be happening to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One of the worst episodes or missions was that bright light on RT Idaho. We were at the point where, like Tilda had been in many times, and so have I, down to the last couple bullets. And the way that the air crews, the A1E pilots, the Vietnamese King Bee pilots, if it hadn't been for them, there would be nobody on our team that would have existed at all. It's amazing what an individual can do when the adrenaline starts and you never feel anything. I don't care if you're shot, grenade goes off. In this episode, I had both boots blown off and the bottom of my feet were shredded like somebody took a razor knife. I had 2 wounds here, and back from the top of my head to my heels was peppered with shrapnel, and it went all the way through the radio, just tore the radio up. And why my backpack didn't explode, because I carried 10 pounds of C4 and 20 hand grenades and 20 magazines of ammunition. You go in, you get no food, it's all ammo. And we had everybody on the team. We ended up with 1 dead, but that was somebody that was thrown at us the last minute that shouldn't have never been on the team. But our medic was wounded. He was paralyzed from the stomach down. He was trying to treat somebody, but he couldn't do it because he couldn't function. So when we seen the first chopper land, I picked him up, threw him over my shoulder, and run and dumped him off in the chopper. I went back because I knew our point man had been shot in the leg and he wasn't going to be able to get out of the crater on his own power. So I did the same thing with him, but I was lucky enough. The medic I carried out, Steve Berry, he weighed 150 pounds. So now you're looking at 112 and about 125 in equipment, and then 150 with all the wounds, and I just threw them on the chopper. And to be honest with you, I never felt any of it, okay? And that's where the adrenaline comes in and being able to try to control it and put it in the right direction. And and I didn't find this out until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. A mutual friend of ours talked to me, Spider Parks, and he was talking with a group of guys at the convention. He said, I want you guys to meet George. So he introduced me, and there was only a couple in that little conglomeration I didn't know. And he said, I'm going to tell you a story. And I didn't know it, what he was going to say. When I brought that last point, when I brought our point man out, put him on the chopper, I turned to go back to help the rest of the team get out by giving them cover. Well, at that point, somebody shot me from the other side of the helicopter, hit me in the elbow, and come out one of these open wounds already. Okay? And I was pissed at that because my thought pattern changed. So I'm left-handed, so I just turned around and emptied the magazine I had. And I don't remember this either. Spider Parks landed in the 3rd helicopter, which was a chase chopper. And he said he looked over at me and he said, at the same time you emptied that magazine, you went just like that, right at the guy. And I said, when did I have time to do that or even think about doing it? He said it was automatic. He said you just went at the same time. And I said, that's a story I didn't know about. But an individual doesn't know, and that's what I was talking about, instantaneous reaction. You have to do this right now. And at that time, I knew that's what we had to do at that time. And it was already embedded here in the muscles. And we get in, we finally get up. They circle, like Tilt said many times, that first helicopter gets up, circles to make sure that their other half of the team got on the 2nd chopper. That was good. We started flying away when the 2nd one got up, and then the 3rd one got up. It had Spider Parks on it, and the medic equipment. Well, as normal, the guys go right to the door and to the windows and start giving cover to the guys that are still left on the ground. And so we did that. Just standard automatic. You don't even think about it. Just, and I'm firing out the window, and I've still got all my equipment on. All of a sudden, boom, I'm flying through the air, heading backwards toward the door. And our point man weighed a little bit less than what I did at the time, stuck his arm out there, and Mike Tucker grabbed me by right around the belt and held me, or I'd have been out 1,500 feet. And when we got back, I said, son of a bitch, that hurt. You know, he said, are you all right? And I said, yeah, as far as I can see, I don't see anything. Well, we flew in, they didn't even land at Fubai. They just flew us to a MASH unit, just right down the road. And I opened up my shirt and then I had a battery pack for the ERT-10, which was in the other pocket. And it looks like a sardine can. It's about that thick, about this wide, about that long. And it fit right down inside my shirt pockets. And I always wore it like that. And I always wore it over my heart area. That round came through, hit that battery pack, picked me up, and moved me across the aircraft from that window to right by the door. And all it did, the round stuck out about that far out of the back of the battery pack, enough to pierce the skin, and I had blood running down my shirt on the inside of the pocket, and it cracked 2 ribs. Right along with everything else. All happened on the same within a matter of minutes. And somebody is watching me. Like my present better half, she said, the Lord isn't ready for you, and the devil damn sure doesn't want you.